All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Sweeter After Difficulty podcast. I am Randy Highsmith, and I'm so excited to have you here. I have with me, as always, Jordan Lopez and Chris Anderson to help us have an amazing conversation. Boys, how you doing today?
Good.
Nice, nice. Well, good to see you guys. All right, so you guys know how this works. But before we get started, we just want to say we hope you had an amazing 4th of July holiday with your families. We hope you stayed safe and sane. We hope you enjoyed the episode last week with my buddy Justin Doyle. What a crazy story, right? And I hope you got a lot out of that. So today, as always, I'm going to kick it over to the Quote Master General himself, Jordan Lopez, to get us started. Jordan?
All right. Quote today is from Miyamoto Musashi. He was the author of the Book of Five Rings. Really good book. The quote is, "It is better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war."
Yeah, I think we might have even mentioned this quote before because it's such an important one and such a good one. And today we're talking a little bit about the nature of choice, right, as it relates to violence, right? I mean, that's pretty much what that quote is discussing. So I want to break this down a little bit, and I want to start first before we get into choice. Let's talk a little bit about violence first. There's so much in the news, so much in social media, so much on TV and in the movies and in music, and in just our conversations in general. And I think that we get a really polarized view of what violence is and the definition of violence. What do you think of immediately when you hear the word violence? Or is there an association that you see a picture in your mind? Is there a what pops in immediately?
I don't.
Me,
Oh, you go, Chris.
it's uh inflicting one's will on another person regardless of what they have to do to resist it. And it can be emotional, it can be physical, most often be associated with the physical, but in my mind it's like inflicting will on someone else. I get to do what I want and you have no choice in that.
I think for me, and I always go back to jujitsu, right? Before I was training, I had a different view on violence than I do now, right? Because you kind of get inoculated to it when you're grappling 4 days, 5 days a week for the last 9 years, right? And I've had plenty of people, Jimmy especially, inflict his will on me, whatever he wanted to do, right? And I don't know, because it's a like I roll with my friends though, and we have this mutual
Right.
understanding. Have this understanding, like, all right, well, if you don't tap, I'm going to hurt you, and if you do tap, I'm not going to hurt you. But it's still that underlying subtle violence there, and even more so, you watch kids do jujitsu, right? We have an incredible instructor at our school, who's famous and renowned. It's like you see that what she's teaching these kids is like there is a hard underlying violence to what these kids are doing, and they're doing it and they're fun and they're laughing and they're doing this stuff. It's like if they were to walk outside and do the exact same move to somebody else, like it'd be a really big deal, a really big problem. And that's kind of like I don't know. It's like I feel like I've kind of become a little more inoculated to violence and that kind of thing, just living the life that I've lived over the last 9 years.
I think you guys both took it in a really interesting direction. So I want to unpack that a little bit and kind of interject, you know, kind of what I heard and then see if we know where we're at. Um, I think of when I had my first kid and he was, he was really little. He was, by the time we had our second kid, he was 2 years old. And so, and I've seen this happen a lot, right? The new baby comes home and the the existing child, the toddler, cruises up, sniffs around, and punches him. To me, you don't assign hatred to the to the action, right? And I wouldn't necessarily say that that's one person because I don't necessarily agree with some of your definition, Chris. So I want to push back a little bit on that because I don't think violence uh, uh, is necessarily the act of inflicting on someone else and imposing your will. I think it's the lashing out right? It's
Uh,
the act of exhibiting that. It's not necessarily that you're going to win. Like you see violence
sure.
happen between, people who
Yeah.
the person instigating, there's no way they're going to win, right? But they're angry or they're frustrated or they're stupid or what, whatever. Like there's a lot of reasons why that happens. I also think it's interesting the jujitsu aspect because jujitsu literally means the gentle art, right? So if anybody isn't familiar with that, it does not look or feel gentle at all when you're doing it. But the reason why it's called the gentle art is because it's probably the most controlled in terms of the violence, right? Like you understand there's a set of rules there, and someone's trying to do their thing and someone else might be defending and then they try to do their thing. It is violent in nature. But you also hear the word violent used in, related to like a car crash, right? And the physicality of the impact and there was a violent crash or something like that. So I'd like to think of violence as in terms of impact and talk about it from that aspect. If we think about the impact of violence, then jujitsu is, probably would be low on this, whatever, like heat Scoville has the heat scale, whatever the scale of violence would be, right? You go from 0 to, faces of death or whatever. I don't, whatever violent thing you've seen. Do you think that, so using the little kid analogy, it seems to me that violence is something that's baked into the human condition.
Mhm.
Right? It's there.
Interesting.
And I think that quote speaks to it, right? It speaks to choice, and we'll get to choice. But if violence is part of the human condition, how do we recognize it and how do we start to decide whether we want to choose it or not?
Yeah. Well, I think that we as a society though are also kind of lucky because we have kind of pushed violence away from our everyday lives. People can live their whole life and never get into a fight, never get into an altercation. You call the police and the police do the violence for you, right? Your neighbor's making a lot of noise and you're like, I'm not gonna go talk to them. I'm gonna call the cops. That's a form of violence, right? You're inflicting your will on somebody else. But I think we have people who we've hired to do violence on our behalf, right? The government will do it, the military will do it. It's like you're not a citizen soldier who's like, well, I'm gonna grab my shield and my sword and go fight this weekend. Like we've pushed a lot of that out. And so I think a lot of people are I think naturally people are afraid of violence, like not understanding it. Like, right? Like,
And I think there should be though. That's a
yeah,
good thing.
but like everybody's afraid. Like I remember the first time I got as a like being like a teenager getting hit in the face, being like, oh,
Yeah.
that wasn't that bad. Like, wait a minute. I wouldn't want to do it again. I'm too old now to get punched in the face. It's not a thing where you're like once you experience it, you're like, oh, that okay. I'm gonna live. I'm gonna survive. I'm gonna be able to move forward. And it's just you have these people who are so violence averse in so much of their life that they end up making these really interesting decisions and really kind of living these lives. You're like because they don't want to be exposed, because they don't want to look stupid or seem to not know what they're doing. In fact, to learn what is necessary to defend yourself or protect yourself or
I
that
think
kind
that's
of.
interesting. Let's keep going down that road. So, why is that a bad thing?
Well, it's personal accountability and autonomy, right? And you start looking at like, oh, if I have a problem, I'll just call the cops. It's like, all right, well, how far are the cops away? Like, you do enough CCW classes or you do enough self defense classes, and you're like, the cops are 10 minutes away. Like, a lot can happen in 10. A lot can happen in 5 minutes. Like, just do a jujitsu round, right? You can get drowned several times by somebody in 5 minutes. Like, where you'd be dead if I didn't let go off your throat. Like,
Right.
and so like, I don't expect everybody to become a black belt, but it's like at least experience that a couple good jujitsu classes and see how helpless you really are, or a boxing class or judo class, or like experience
I,
helpless and let that determine how you want to live your life going forward. Like you can pretend that it never happened. Be exposed
I
for it.
think that's such a part of the essence of the quote that you brought, like, warrior in a garden or gardener in a war. And my experience when you mentioned jujitsu is like, yes, it's violence with certain constraints so that you have exposure to what violence could be if those
Mhm.
constraints never existed. And a couple of things for me happened in the first few months of doing that sport, which is one, like similar to the experience you said, like when you get into a fight as a teenager, you get punched in the face and you're like, okay, that wasn't as bad as I first thought it was. Right. But then you go, I also don't want to expose myself to this repeatedly. Right. Particularly if it's a method of conflict resolution, like not an effective method in all cases. Certainly
Mhm.
some cases are different than others. But I also think this notion of like the sport of jujitsu exposes you to what violence could be, and you get a little bit of self-sufficiency. Like, how can I help myself until the good guys show up? Right.
Mhm.
There's also this notion of like jujitsu reduces the fear associated with violence because you can prepare yourself to stay safe. And that also, like, you use the Roosevelt quote, right? The only thing to fear is fear itself. And I think that applies a lot to this, like, people being afraid of violence. Like, if violence is a part of the human condition, whether we want it to be there or not, there has to be a degree of preparedness that you take. How am I
Mhm.
going to feel safe when something out of my control happens around?
Yeah. You used an interesting word too, Jordan, when you were talking, and the word until you feel helpless, right? Until
Mhm.
like we talk about Big Jimmy all the time, but that was truly like rolling the first time I did when I did with Jimmy was the first time where, another human took my strong arm and moved it like it had nothing in it to where he
Yeah.
wanted it to go. In a way that I've never felt helpless like that. Like, whoa, I have there's nothing I can do versus his strength, speed, and skill.
Mhm.
Like there's nothing.
And it's the
Um
full package, right? Like
right,
so
yeah.
many people are just going to sit there and go, I'm going to get really buff. And that's how I'm going to protect myself from violence. And it's like, okay, but what if there's someone else really strong who
Yeah.
also knows what they're
What if
doing?
there's a person with a gun? That was Bruce Lee's point.
Totally.
He said
Right.
it all the time, like, why
Right.
doesn't somebody just pull out a gun? Like, we're operating under the
Right.
assumption that we're hand to hand here.
Right. Mutual
Um,
combat.
yeah, and you used the word constraints, which I think is interesting, but it's also a little bit telling, right? It's like, yeah,
Totally.
there's no fear there unless you don't tap fast enough.
Mhm.
Right, but most people are gonna give you a chance. Most people, you'll see it coming, you'll have time, outside of these ancillary injuries you get, like, most people aren't getting broken knees or shoulders or, getting choked
Totally.
to death, like, it's not happening.
Right.
But that's also a dividing line between the constraints of a martial art and the reality of having to use it in the street, right, or defending yourself in a real situation. I also think it's interesting the notion of calling the police. Um, you know, some places like where I live, it's gonna be a while before the cops get here, even if I say there's someone outside with a flamethrower and my house is on fire, right? It's gonna be a while before someone gets here. It feels like the fear of doing wrong by people who are inclined to do so is greatly diminished as well by the idea that the person who lives here can't or will not defend themselves against me and I have time to wait, right? Um what do you think is that a societal failure? Is it an individual failure? Is it a failure at all?
I think it is. I think it's like I don't know. I see like martial arts, or I see like I don't know. I see being fit and martial arts kind of like it's like similar to like health insurance or car insurance, or like you buy these things in life where you
Eating your
pray that,
vegetables.
yeah, or health insurance or house insurance or whatever. Like I've been training for 9 years. I've gotten in zero fights with people on the street. Right. I've had my CCW for 15 years. I've never shot anybody. Like I'm not. I don't ever want to do it. I never want to
That's the
use my
goal. Yeah.
ever want to use jujitsu on the street and break some dude's shoulder. Like I don't ever look for fights. I have no interest in it. Like, but if that does come, I would much rather be the person who knows what they're doing than the person who doesn't know what they're doing. And you, you're this flailing and hoping that something happens and you could be saved.
Yeah, what is the saying? The worst time to learn something is when you need to use it.
And
You
don't
know,
have it. Yeah, exactly.
I was terrified to find out my limitations, in an active situation, which is what caused the initial testing in the first place, right? Like, I got to find out if my brain idea lines up with what my body's physically capable of backing up.
Yeah.
Turns out it did not. Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's funny. That's funny. So, okay. I think we're all in agreement that violence is baked in, right? It's from the time you're born, it's in there. So then the journey shifts to choice. And if you know me, if you talk to me at any length of time, you know that I believe everything is choice, right? It's every single thing is choice. So why do you think it is that some people choose to go the path of violence and some people choose to go the path of the ability to use that violence but don't use it, or why some people choose the pacifist role where they never use violence at all? What do you think it is from a big picture view, right? Obviously everybody has a individual journey and a life and a granular reason why they're either pro or against it, but in a general term or a bigger sense, what do you think those things are? Do you think we're influenced? Do you think so I guess I'll give you a little bit of context. I grew up in the time where television was just figuring out that the audience was actually children, not adults, right? So they started having Saturday mornings that were like a 8-hour block of cartoons, and between every commercial break, you were seeing a brand new toy or a brand new cereal or a brand new, whatever. Um, and most of these shows, most of the ones that, especially the ones I was interested in, were incredibly violent, right? Like I was watching Transformers, it's robots fighting robots, G.I. Joe, like all of these, even the ones that were not necessarily violent or not necessarily like made to be like about war or fighting or whatever, but even in the cartoons like Tom and Jerry, I mean, unbelievably violent, right?
Mm.
It's a cat and a mouse, so it's not a big deal. But I wonder sometimes if my, desensitivity to seeing some of these things happen in real life, or even, or just seeing the headlines that they're happening in real life, if it doesn't impact me as much because I was already inoculated with that concept in a colorful, chewy way when I was a kid. Anything there? Like, do you guys feel that? Were you as influenced by those things as I was?
I definitely think there's meat on that bone for sure. I mean, I think a lot of those, like the notion of violence in media is a mirror to our own culture in a way, right? Because if the only reason those shows exist is to sell stuff and make money, you have to put the thing that's going to get the most eyeballs up in between your sales pitches. And in a way, it's like Saturday morning cartoons aren't about the cartoons, they're about what's being sold and how they keep people watching the commercials for what's being sold. So you put the most high impact thing you can for the demographic you're trying to get to. And in a way, yes, right, that's going to be driven by the reflection of cultural interests. You're going to show science fiction and you're going to show violence within the science fiction and you're going to show westerns and you're going to show violence within the westerns and so on and so forth. So I think that over time inoculates yourself to the severity of what violence actually is in the macro level with, territorial disputes and resource wars, all the way to the micro level where you hate your neighbor because they painted the fence the wrong color and they're screaming at you for it, right? But that whole notion of the consequence of violence is dulled as a result.
Yeah, because you see Jerry slam a mallet on top of Tom and flatten him out, and then in the next
Right.
scene they're fine, right? They're just
Right.
going at it again. So you think,
Right.
as a kid, I can just slam
Right.
somebody with a mallet and they'll
And
bounce
then,
back. It's not a
right,
big
like
deal.
2 hours later, Hulk Hogan is suplexing Andre the Giant, and they both
100%.
stand up and cheer afterwards, and you're like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. You know, and so I'm like, right, like there's a lot of like notion of like that's for little
And
boys and all
they
that
just
stuff too.
do like all the kid shows, at least when we were kids, like it's X-Men, Spider-Man, and all this stuff is
Right.
like it all revolves around violence, right? And you like it. And the bigger the dude, the more buff the guy is, the more violent he was, and you're there for it. And then you walk outside and they're like, don't hit that person. That person hits you, don't hit them back.
Right.
Like don't you
It's super confusing when you're a kid.
love seeing it and you want to see it and you want to watch it, but then you are told the moment that some kid punches you, don't punch them back. We'll get a t-shirt. You're like, but that's not what the last 6 hours of cartoons I watched tells
Right.
me to do.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think there's also like, I don't want to take this on a side path, but it's also like that's definitely I think our experience. But like my sister grew up watching totally different things and was influenced in totally different directions, none of which were associated with violence. Right. So it's
Well,
not just like
yeah, well, so I think there's a huge thing you're saying about, the marketing of it, right? If you're
right,
watching the He-Man
says the
cartoon
marketer.
and then the commercial comes on and it's for the He-Man toys, then you're like, I gotta have that, right? So I definitely, and then, but I also think that's true. I've seen the shift from, just straight violence selling things to sex selling things to, whatever the current thing is that people are, okay, we're tired of violence, so now we want to move on. Okay, we're
You have
tired
to
of that. Now we
create
want
like a false ideal for the customer you're trying to sell to, and you create a false idea of violence being cool so that you can sell Wolverine's claws as a plastic toy, and you sell the idea that beauty is the only thing little girls should pursue so that they can buy this training makeup kit and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it's also too, is like, because you can like look at like the John Wick series, right? Like somebody who he's not big and scary and gnarly, but he's fully capable of doing what he needs to do to achieve his end goal, right? And so and they show all the training that Keanu Reeves went through, like to make the movie, right? He did jujitsu, he did tons of weapons training, and people like watching people be competent at that kind of thing, right? Or
Right,
even,
right.
but even more like football. Like football is an extremely violent sport, and it's a spectator sport, and the dudes who play football are all superhuman, and they're all enormous, and they throw each other around and smack each other, and everybody's down for it, right?
I
But
played
then,
football for 9 years from when I was 8 to 17. And
mhm.
every team I was on since I was 9 years old, when we did film study, every single one, it began with a highlight package of the most violent hits you could see. And we're talking about hits now that are illegal, that have been banned from the game. But it's the type of hit where when you talk to your buddies and you're like, remember the old days when you could really flatten someone? And it's like, oh, yeah, that guy had CTE and shot his family. Right? Like, so this notion of like, we're trying to magnify the most extreme version of violence is certainly like I think a cultural mirror if that's the direction that we're going. But I think we're talking also about the potential negative side effect and maybe even getting away from like Musashi's quote in the sense of like this is potentially the bad apple side, but like the notion I think Musashi is bringing up is like violence is a part of the human condition, and if you're not prepared for it, you're not going to survive.
Well, so what if we asked a question on the end of the quote? Or what?
Mhm.
Better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war, or what? Or what
Yeah,
happens? What's
yeah,
the consequence of why is it better?
yeah. Well, it could be nothing, right? The war could never come, and you spent your whole life training for something that never exists, right? And then the gardener and the warrior are both like, well, like I didn't really need that skill that I had,
Right.
but but the could come, right? I mean, nobody's ever free from a bad altercation, right? You drive your car every day. There's protests or whatever. People are always doing something stupid, and you're never always 100% free of it. And so I don't know. It's you hear cops who go their whole career never drawing their weapon, never firing a shot, but then you have cops in other places. You're like, well, yeah, I've been in 6 shootouts and I've been on the job for 5 years. You're like, what's that like? How it's just the idea of training.
So you made a comment earlier about, depending on the cops or depending on a government or depending on people to take care of us. But that probably stemmed from a time when you had people who were warriors, right? Who were like, the big strong people who could go fight, and you counted on them to keep your country safe. If you break that down to the granular level, then now we're talking about all the way down to keeping our neighborhoods safe. But that was always your responsibility, right? Like especially as Americans, we were told that freedom isn't free, but that burden somehow became put on all the people in uniform and stopped being the responsibility of the individual citizen. In fact, there's sometimes when you get, judged or labeled because you choose to practice violence or to practice, knowing how to mitigate violence. But what's the danger of being a gardener in a war then?
Not being prepared.
And what's the result of that?
Usually not making it.
Yeah.
And if you don't make it, right, if you're not making it, right, if that means that you're killed, the other gardeners are probably killed too, right? Everybody else so take the word gardener out and put in office worker, or salesman or actor, or or what?
Doctor.
Or doctor, right? Or anybody that has a skill that isn't related to being able to protect themselves or to, meet violence with violence as it needed. There's that saying, fight fire with fire, kind of, relates to violence too, right? I won't get, granular into gun laws because I know people have emotional feelings about that and, and all those things. But the first thing that happens when a crime is committed is you call someone who has a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Then that is the reality. You don't call the fire department when someone's breaking into your house or assaulting you. You call someone who can come protect you and come use violence against someone to protect you. So if you're willing to live in a society where you shirk the responsibility of protecting yourself and put it onto someone else, what do they get for that? Right? Well, like, why is my life on the line and you're not responsible for protecting your own stuff, while you're waiting that half an hour for the cops to get there or whatever the situation is? That's what I'm afraid of. That's what drives me to not want to end up in a situation where I couldn't defend I mean, obviously, to Chris's point, right? There's always a bigger fish.
Yeah.
You can only prepare for a certain amount of things. And so you prepare for the thing that you think is the most likely outcome, right? I don't see a lot of gunfights in my communities, but I do see people getting fistfights a lot, and I mean, I see people get out of cars and fight each other and punch. I see a lot of internet videos where people are punching and, kicking, and not a lot where people are shooting, but I also learned how to shoot, in case that unlikely eventuality does come.
Yeah. It's all distance, right? Like guns give you distance and time and space. And I remember I had a conversation with one of my wife's friend's husbands one time. The guy was super soft and he had like 6 daughters. And he's like, yeah, I use pepper spray for self-defense. And I'm like, why? Or a baseball bat. I'm like, have you ever gone hands-on with anybody? Like, you don't want to be close to somebody because if you don't kill me with a baseball bat, like,
right.
We're really
well, and that's okay. So I love the way that you talk about it, like with distance and time, and I think that applies to the nature of violence. Full stop. Like at any scale, like that definition scales up and down. And we've talked about it on the podcast before, but my first experience in jujitsu was the death of my own ego in the sense of like I recognized that I went hands-on for the first time in my life that first day I walked into jujitsu, and I was so helpless that if it was real, I would have been dead. Right. And that recognition to me was so profound. And now looking back 5.5 years later and hearing, oh yeah, someone's going to use a baseball bat. It doesn't matter. If I get inside the distance that you can effectively swing that bat, cause harm, it's over for you. And if I know how to manage the distance and get inside that before you know how to swing a bat, because you've never been hands-on with somebody, that's my advantage. Right. And that's why it's important to be like, have that exposure and preparedness I'm not saying I'm seeking fights. Like I would never, knowing what I know now, I don't ever want to get to a fight ever.
Right, right,
No.
Right.
right. It's
But
amazing the correlation between learning how to fight and losing the desire to do it. You know,
yeah,
once
right.
once you really know what
I'm
the
good,
outcome is.
man.
I've been
Yeah.
thinking lately about this thing too, and so tell me what you think, because it kind of relates to what both of you were talking about. Preferably, you would have the distance and time to think about it, to be able to plan and prepare for violence coming, right? But you don't always have that, right? And you don't always get that opportunity. Sometimes someone walks right up behind you and just initiates violence, and you are just caught
And you're
unaware.
on.
Right?
Yep.
So I see these memes all the time, you know, about walking by someone and they're pretending that they're happy, but secretly they're sad inside, you know, and the meme is always something like, you never know what somebody's going through, you know, but it's always about that somebody had, you know, a death in the family, or they were dealing with a hard illness or whatever. It's never somebody that's boiling with rage inside that was just about to, you know, grab your baby out of his stroller and throw it on the ground, you know, which, I mean, like, that seems like an extreme example, but it's a one I've seen in a video in the last 48 hours, you know, of a real thing happening. Um, do you want to be preparing for that when it's happening? I mean, that's what it always comes back to me, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think it's important to know how to garden, but I also think it's important to know how to protect the garden and to protect the family and to protect the people who count on the garden to eat, you know, and
Well, it's also too like it's also and it's funny now. I think it's an obvious thing, but it's also I think it's sex based too. Like dudes, women are more likely to be assaulted than guys are often, and so
I think the
like
statistics bear that out too.
yeah, and it's like all right, well then if you're training with women or you have a girl who's there, like, and it's funny because I've had this conversation recently, like because as you see like girls will train with each other, and you're like, and I remember as a coach being like, you're hurting yourself doing that, like because oh yes, you're comfortable with them and you're the same size and I get it and you're learning the moves, but it's like what's the reason behind jujitsu right now? Is it self defense or is it a hobby you want to do and learn to
As a
compete in?
sport. Right.
Is it right? Because most of the time, if it's a self defense related thing, like you should be training with guys and guys who can give you a good look, honestly, and help you get an understanding of what you can and can't do in that situation, right?
I mean, we
And guys,
talk all the time about how much size matters in this sport when technique is equal, right? I'm going to get crushed by a purple belt that's 6'8", 300 pounds. There's not much I'm going to be able to do.
yeah, well, yeah, and then as guys too, you can look like a hard target, right? Your aesthetic says something about you before any interaction ever starts, right? If you look like an easy mark because you're soft and sensitive and kind of cowering and kind of being like mousy, then you're more likely to get hurt by somebody who's looking for violence. But if you're a big dude with the shoulders back and you're comfortable and you're like, maybe you lift weights randomly, people are not going to bother you as much because they don't want the work. Like, and there's statistics that prove like predators don't hunt for the strongest, biggest, whatever. They hunt for the weak one that's kind of been separated from the pack. So if you can do things for yourself to make you not be that easy to target, like the confidence that you get from doing a fighting sport, the confidence you get from lifting weights, the confidence you get from eating healthy.
There's like, I remember reading, there was a sociology study that tattoos, the study of tattoos. And it talked a lot about how the placement of tattoos was more specific to the image an individual was projecting. And they looked at criminals with tattoos, and then they looked at those who had no crime sheet. And I'll have to go look up what the study was. But anyway, what they found was that you were more likely to have tattoos on your face if you were attempting to project a certain image of "don't fuck with me." And it like speaks directly to that notion of like trying to become a hard target. Obviously, I have been blessed to not live in circumstances that would require me to have to be a hard target day in and day out. But
right.
it was fascinating to see that there is some sociology, there is some science behind that, like the notion of being a hard target.
So I think that's a great segue into the next thought I was having, which is, as Jordan was talking, then I was thinking, yep, there's intentionally not painting a soft target, and then there's things you just can't help, right? Some people are born smaller. Some people are born more frail. Some people are, are born with less muscle mass. Some people are, and some people never get to that point where like no matter how bad I want it or how much jujitsu or yoga I do, I'm never going to be over 6 feet tall, right? So I'm automatically out on the TikTok dating scale. Thank God I'm married. Uh, but, um, but to that point as well, right? It comes down to the ability to defend yourself is crucial in a situation where you want to be able to decide for yourself how you live, right? In a free society, you have to be able to defend that freedom. And sometimes defending it means that you die. Sometimes it means that you die on your feet rather than living as, a slave on your knees. And that's a real thing. As someone who wasn't born tiny and wasn't born with the inability to, to bulk up or to learn how to defend myself, I was lucky. I feel fortunate. And I feel like that also makes it part of my responsibility to help defend that ideal, to help defend that freedom for myself and others, right? I wouldn't necessarily think I see somebody on the street getting assaulted, I'm going to call the cops and wait for them to show up and handle it, right? How can I help? I think the hard part comes, and this is a little bit more into the rights section of it, but I remember when I got my CCW up here in Northern California, and the first thing our instructor told us was, if you're carrying a gun, carry pepper spray too. And if you have to pull one, pull the pepper spray. So this is a trainer, right? Like training me how to responsibly carry a weapon to use to defend myself. And the laws are so against people carrying their own guns that you're more likely to get in trouble for pulling that gun to defend yourself or someone else than you are to just pepper spray them, right?
Yeah.
That's a cutting off at the knees of our ability to defend our freedom and to exercise our rights, which is why the Second Amendment is so important. It's why it's there. You don't have to choose that for your life. But when you're afraid for your life, where are you looking? What are you thinking about? Who are you calling? Right? It's so fascinating hearing the arguments against people being able to exercise that right. But to the point, it all comes back to fear, I think, right?
Mhm.
That choice ends up coming back to fear of failure to start training, or fear of someone else who you don't feel like they have the right to make their own decisions about themselves, having a weapon that they could potentially use against you. It's fear. It's just fear-based.
Mhm.
So if we're thinking about, obviously this quote is extolling the virtues of harnessing your ability to be violent, not necessarily exercising it, but having it in your pocket in case you need it, right? What do you think then is the first step in mitigating fear so that you can become ready?
Mhm. I think it's being proactive, doing the thing. Like if you're, it's just it's being proactive in your choices, right? Everything's like you said, Randy. Everything's a choice. Like if you're lacking in strength, join a gym. If you're and all the information is out there for you, how to gain muscle mass, how to get stronger. Like if you feel uncomfortable and with going hands on with somebody, do judo, do jujitsu, start wrestling. Like it's everything is there.
Yeah.
You have to give something up to take responsibility for your life, and it's not nice. It's not comfortable, right? But
Well, it's funny because you hear some of these people go, well, just run. And I'm like, I would like to see you run 50 yards down the road right now.
It's so
Like,
funny
right?
to
Get away
right.
from someone.
Yeah.
Show me
It's
your
it's a
plan.
it's a good idea until you get 45 seconds down the line when your adrenaline is spiked higher than it's ever been, right? And you haven't done your cardio in 6 months. And you're like, "No, I would just get away." And I'm like, "Okay, but what if you can?"
yeah,
Like, how
well,
do
you
you
you go on vacation, like to the ocean, and I've been to the ocean several times. I grew up on the ocean, and there's always these people who go on vacation to Hawaii, and the dude has a heart attack because he's not done anything in 2 years, right? And he's swimming in the ocean with his kids and running around, and then it's like, then he drops dead. Yeah, it's terrible. But you're like, you've not done anything. Like the society we live in has allowed us to allow men to not feel the urge to be in good shape, right? Like it's
Like
it.
you're kind of like hitting around it too. It's like like I think it's incumbent upon everybody to have at least an honest assessment of what they don't know, right? And as someone who doesn't own a firearm, I'm very honest, with both of you. I'm like, I should probably at least know how to shoot, service, and operate, right? Owning or pursuing a CCW, I don't know if that's ever something I would want to do. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I'm fully aware that that is not a base of knowledge or skills that I have. And because I know enough about violence from training jujitsu and how in that room I know I'm safe, outside of those four walls, I don't want to get into a fight because what if someone pulls a gun? It's it, right? And I don't want to use violence as conflict resolution, but if something happens to me, or if I can go help out, or if you come near my family and you're in that distance, that's a different story unless someone has a weapon, right? And so I know that I don't have that. I have to go seek it out. Like that's incumbent upon me. I have to be the one responsible for that.
So as we get close to time here, in the very beginning, Chris, you said when you were giving the definitions of violence, you talked about another type of violence, right? That wasn't physical, and it wasn't, it wasn't out, um, it was, you talked about emotional violence. Can you talk a little bit about what you consider emotional violence? Because
Yeah,
I think I hear a lot about this concept, um, you know, sensationalized, but nobody ever
yeah,
really talks about what it is. Talk
right.
about that a little bit.
Yeah. So in my mind, I think it's easy to get wrapped around the idea of like, oh, well, you are emotionally abusing me. And I think like there are cases when that is true and cases when that is not true and is maybe used as a crutch or a scapegoat to explain something else. But I also think it's true, and I have relationships like this where someone will use their inability to control their emotions to inflict
Mm,
their will on me. And I'm not saying to elicit an emotional reaction, but to cause me to do something or force me to act or react in a way that I otherwise can't. So if I'm backed into a corner in any kind of relationship in that way, it is maybe not violence in the ballistic sense. And I wouldn't personally call it that way. But if we are expanding the definition to include, I'm inflicting my will on you, there are other ways to do that other than physical, right? And
mm,
so we can kind of be really like specific on how we want to define the scope of the violence, right? Like violence is the ballistic side of inflicting your will, and inflicting your will in other areas isn't necessarily violence, but something else perhaps. Like that makes sense too. But for me, it's like, hey man, just because you're having a fit and you're saying that I have to go out and do all this other shit just to make you happy and I've wronged you in all of these ways, like I had nothing to do with that. Like that's on you. I shouldn't have to carry your weight when you bring that to my door, you know?
Yeah.
well, right. That's kids crying about things they don't get and throwing a fit about things they don't like. That's like trying to use their emotion to manipulate the situation, right? And you
Right.
expect different
Yeah, that's
when you see
much
it.
more. Yeah, well said. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because then usually what happens, right, is then that leads to the violence.
Exactly.
Right? In
Yes.
one way or
Yes.
another. Um,
Yes.
but I think it's important to define that, right? I think even how you walked it out and where we arrived at, okay, maybe it's not necessarily violence per se, but maybe it's a violence precursor, or maybe it's,
Right.
because to your point, right, when somebody's really trying to make me acknowledge out loud that they're right and I'm not about something that I'm convinced that they're not right about,
It's an imposition of will.
and to that point, eventually I'm going to go, look, you can say it louder, right? But
That
I
doesn't
don't
make you
agree with
right.
you. I don't agree with you. I don't agree with the premise.
Yeah.
You can get closer to me, you can get louder, you can do whatever, right? Yeah, that's interesting. I just, when I heard you say it, I was like, I wonder what let's walk that out a little bit. It's just kind of an interesting idea, you
Yeah.
know? Um, okay, so back to the original quote as we wrap up. Um, better to be a warrior. How do how hard do you think it is, or what is the reason why some people are able to choose to be a warrior in a garden or just to stay a warrior in war all the time?
I think it's a I don't know, I think it's a personal responsibility kind of a thing. Like the society we live in is divided between like politics, it's divided between social things, and it's like I think certain types of people want to do things themselves, want to take responsibilities for their actions, want to live the life that they want to live, and then deal with the repercussions of it. And the other part of society doesn't. They don't want to like it's a lot like electronics, right? Like, I don't know. I work with electricians at my job. I have no idea how it works, right? I want to flip the switch and I want the switch to work. And I want the light. But and when the lights don't turn on, I can't fix it myself. And so it's
Yeah.
kind of that understanding of like when the lights go out when it comes to a violence issue, it's you need to. It would be good to know what to do at least a little bit. And it's just where do you fall in those groups? Are you somebody who
Yeah.
that farms violence out to somebody else? Are you somebody who doesn't look for it, but if it comes, you have an idea of what you can and can't do, right? And but the world's also full of a bunch of dudes who are jocks in high school and think they can handle business, right? Until because they had that one fight when they were 18, and now they know that they're Billy Badass and they can handle themselves, right? Like, but there's not enough opportunity to really test, to really means test your perspective of yourself, right? Unless you look for it, and
Yeah.
that's the strength of jujitsu is that I can feel good about myself and have a great round with one person, and then the next round, the guy who's way better than me just beats the life out of me, and gives you a good reminder on where your hierarchy is in that room. But you have to look for it, right? I can only roll with white belt the rest of my career, and feel amazing about myself, right? But not living under with gravity in reality is a hard, oftentimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just so interesting to me how fear-based these these choices end up being, um, so often that not only k- restricts what we end up doing, like restricts action, but it gives us this idea that if we're choosing not to be violent, then no one should be able to, or no, you know what I mean? It comes down to that personal freedoms and personal accountability and responsibility. I think that was right. Um, yeah. Whew. Well, we knew this one was going to be kind of heavy. like when we were talking about the quote ahead of time, we were like, yeah, this one's going to be heavy. But awesome conversation. I always love unpacking these things for you, even if we don't even arrive somewhere, just the idea of keeping the discourse open and expanding our ideas and our perspectives. And you guys always help me do that. I appreciate you so much for it. Thank you always for being here. And for you for being here, everyone listening to this podcast, thank you so much. Be sure to check it out on Spotify and Rumble. Share it out, like, subscribe, do all the things. We're going to grow this organically and slowly. We're having an amazing, fun time having these conversations and sharing them with you. So hopefully you're enjoying them. If you are, let other people know and bring them into the family. We'd love to have them. Until our next episode, Jordan, Chris, thank you so much. And to all of you, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, man.